Canaanite is a Semitic language like Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. There are three branches of Semitic: East, West, and South. There was a time when most African-centered historians were of the opinion that the speakers of Semitic languages originally belonged to a physical type known as Semites. The physical appearance of Semites approximated what Hermstein, a black Sumer, calls the common idea of a Middle Easterner. Many African-centered researchers started to question this position as they came to learn the African origins of Afroasiatic. The rest of the world is yet to meaningfully question the notion of the Semite in a racial sense. The Semitic family itself belongs to a superfamily or phylum known as Afroasiatic. Afroasiatic is made up of 6 broadly agreed branches, but some specialists divide it into 7 or 8. The agreed branches are Omotic, Cushitic, Chadic, Berber, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. Of the 6 branches, Semitic is the only one spoken outside of Africa. Some linguists think the Beja language of eastern Sudan forms a separate branch distinct from Cushitic. The history of research into Afroasiatic goes all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. The concept of Afroasiatic encountered problems from the beginning, as can be seen from the following passage. We quote. Reinisch, 1909, linked Cushitic and Chadic with Semitic and Egyptian, concluding that Afroasiatic, Shemitish in his terminology, must have originated in Africa. Reinisch's conclusions are rarely cited and were probably so unwelcome in 1909 that they proved difficult to absorb. Quoted from page 142 of Roger Blench's 2006 book Archaeology, Language and the African Past. This definitely needs further discussion. Why was it so difficult to absorb in 1909? We might also ask whether the situation over 100 years later is really all that different. Like the social experience of Africans in the European-dominated world, some things have changed while others have not. This is a far more honest and sophisticated outlook than simply concluding that things have remained the same or that they have changed completely. There are armies of people, mainly of European descent, who are devoted to proving a non-African origin of Afroasiatic. There are geneticists, some non-Africanist linguists, and many bloggers who are devoted to this end. We, therefore, conclude that his findings are still unwelcome today in many circles. We also add that if one concludes an African origin for Afroasiatic, it implies an African appearance of the first speakers of Afroasiatic. This is the full implication of Reinisch's conclusion, a conclusion that would be unwelcome amongst many Western academics who propound an African origin for Afroasiatic. The full implication is a lot further than many Europeans are prepared to go. This is why it is never actually stated in any of the Afroasiatic literature. In the 1940s, the American linguist Joseph Greenberg expanded the Shemitish notion of Reinisch to 5 families and called it Afroasiatic. These families were Egyptian, Berber, Cushitic, Semitic, and Chadic. Greenberg's inclusion of Chadic in Afroasiatic was vociferously challenged. In a straight-speaking moment, the American linguist Larry Trask explained why. We quote. It is clear, for example, that one of the reasons for the long resistance to the inclusion of Chadic in Afroasiatic was that Chadic speakers are incontrovertibly black, while speakers of the best-known Afroasiatic languages are white. The 19th century prejudice that regarded language as intimately bound up with culture and with race, prejudice that has perhaps not entirely disappeared, made it hard for the linguists of the time to accept black languages in a white family. End of quote from Trask's 2015 edition of his book Historical Linguistics. Trask here shows the same problem as Blench. He speaks of prejudice the same way many people of European descent do, as if it is something of the past. Even his admission of its persistence is expressed as perhaps not entirely disappeared. And yet, picking up an edition of any newspaper could decidedly settle the question for him. Most people of African descent are a lot clearer about the reality of the persistence of racial prejudice in all walks of life, including the academic arena. It should also not be assumed that academic writers who notice the prejudice of others are above committing it themselves. Blench proceeds to tell us that an African origin for Afroasiatic is more likely to be rejected by linguists specializing in 2 branches of the superfamily, in particular. We quote. questioning the Near Eastern origin of Afroasiatic is almost a taboo subject among scholars with a Semitic or Egyptological background. But, researchers based in the more diverse African branches concluded long ago that its most likely homeland was in sub-Saharan Africa, more specifically southwest Ethiopia, the present location of its most fragmented branch, Omotic, and the center of gravity of Cushitic. The correlation with the Natufian culture of the Near East, Militarev 2000, fails the primary test of explaining the geography and internal diversity of African Afroasiatic. Although it is likely that many northern languages have been eliminated, it is still very hard to model the expansion of Afroasiatic on the assumption that it originated in the Near East. This would be structurally equivalent to assuming Austronesian originated in New Zealand or Niger-Congo in the rainforests of Central Africa. End of quote. Blench 2006, page 150. Why would Semitists and Egyptologists champion an Asian origin for Afroasiatic rather than the African origin favored by most Afroasiatic linguists? Answer: because they understand the full implication for the first speakers of both Semitic and Ancient Egyptian. Again, we need to stress that those linguists who support an African origin for the superfamily do not openly speak of the African appearance of the first speakers of this superfamily. They do not mention it at all, and if pushed, would probably say anything but what we have just said. But accepting an African origin leaves the door open to reaching the logical conclusion. We should also explain Blench's last comment. He likens the claim of Afroasiatic originating in the Near East to thinking Austronesian originated in New Zealand or Niger-Congo originating in Central Africa. What does he mean by this? It is linked to his statement a few lines before about the primary test of explaining geography and internal diversity. We shall give a very simple example to illustrate his point. English is the only Germanic language spoken on the island of Britain, opposite West Central Europe. In West Central Europe itself, Germanic languages are also spoken, like Dutch, Danish, Frisian, and German. The West Central European Germanic languages belong to both branches of Germanic, while Britain only has a language from one Germanic branch. Where did Germanic languages originate? If the only two choices are Britain and West Central Europe, then the evidence strongly suggests West Central Europe because it has more Germanic languages and it has more Germanic branches, internal diversity. This makes it by far the simpler answer. In scientific deduction, the simplest answer, all other things being even, is the answer that should be adopted. Of the approximately 250 Afroasiatic languages spoken today, around 25 are Semitic. Of the 6 agreed branches of Afroasiatic, only Semitic has Asian representatives, while the other branches are entirely spoken in Africa. This means the greater internal diversity is overwhelmingly with the African section of Afroasiatic rather than the West Asian. The same applies to Southeast Asia, which has many branches of the Austronesian superfamily, while New Zealand has a language belonging to the Polynesian branch. The same also applies to West Africa, which has many more branches of the Niger-Congo superfamily than does Central Africa. This makes Afroasiatic of African rather than West Asian origin. Currently, 5 locations in Africa have been proposed as the origins of Afroasiatic. The first was suggested by the Russian linguist Igor Diakonov, who theorized that it originated in the Sahara. Christopher Ehret, an American linguist, proposed the area from the Red Sea Hills from Eritrea to southeast Egypt. The British linguist Roger Blench theorized the Omo Valley of southwest Ethiopia as the origins of the superfamily. Lionel Bender, an American linguist, theorized the Blue-White Nile confluence in central Sudan as the area of origins for Afroasiatic. Martin Bernal suggested it originated in the Kenya-Ethiopia border region. The only other suggested location is in Palestine, the area of the Natufian culture, as proposed by the Russian linguist Alexander Militarev. This is the only non-African location that has been proposed by a linguist working in the field. We should point out that Palestine is right on the doorstep of Africa, but it is still an unlikely location given the distribution of the 6 agreed branches. Conclusion: everything about Afroasiatic languages suggests an African rather than West Asian origin. There are far more Afroasiatic languages in Africa than in Asia. All the branches of Afroasiatic, but one, are located in Africa, and the exception is located next to Africa. This means the overwhelmingly greater internal diversity for the superfamily is in the African section. Also, the individual branches that have the most internal subdivisions within themselves are located in Ethiopia. These are Omotic and Cushitic. This greater internal diversity in an individual branch strongly suggests they are older than the other branches and that the area of origin should be looked for in the region where Cushitic and Omotic are located. Their location becomes a far more likely area of origin for Afroasiatic than West Asia. This means the ancestors of the first Semitic speakers were African, and probably from Ethiopia. The Canaanites spoke a Semitic language and therefore had sub-Saharan African ancestors. They were Afro-Canaanites. To find out more about this fascinating civilization and their Black heritage, click on the link in the description, which will take you to the book's Amazon page. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe and click to receive notifications. Thanks for watching.